So in a previous video, I started pulling apart my new contract called Inbox. I left off at the functions down here, and let me continue on the different functions and what they do. And we're first going to start off by taking a look at the syntax of the getMessage function. So I'm going to pull up a diagram. Let's see where diagram, there it is. And I'll go ahead and share this with you all right now. And I'm going to resize it, so make it as legible as possible. All right, so I'm going to take a look at some of the different parts of the getMessage function's declarations. We first start off with the function keyword, the function keyword here, and then the name of the function here. And there's no given requirements about the name of any given function in Solidity, just common programming sense. And I just want to make sure that if someone else is looking at this function, it's clear what the purpose is. In this case, we call it getMessage because it gets and retrieves a given message inside the contract. So you want to make this as semantic as possible. I think the function name was pretty reasonably picked in this case, pretty semantic. So after the function name, we list out, rather in here, we list out some different arguments that the function can be called with. But in this case, as you can see, getMessage did not accept any arguments, and so I left this set of parentheses empty. However, if I go back to setMessage, I'll go back to my code so you could see what I'm talking about. So if I go back to setMessage here, you can see that it's called with one argument. And just to be clear, this is one argument, not two. What this is saying here is that it's a string, but it's just one argument of new message. And so that's one argument called new message with type of string. So that's how you want to read that. If it was called with a string, then that string would be assigned to the variable new message, and then we can access that argument from within the body of the function. Let's see, yeah, we can access with the body of the function, and if we ever try calling setMessage with an array or a number, then this function, it'll throw an error and it'll tell us that we have to call it with a string because it's clear right here that it has to be called with a string. All right, so we can go back to the diagram. Head back there, okay. And after the function name of getMessage in this case, and the argument list, we'll list out the function type. And this is going to be always changing number of words. It's not always going to be public review. And in other words, sometimes we're going to see public and view. Other times it'll be just the word public. In fact, I have an example in my actual code. I'll go back to that again so you can see the code and see an example of that. So as you can see here, I just have public in the setMessage function. And then in the getMessage function, you can see I have public and I also have view. And we're always going to have some number of words after the argument list, and we refer to these as the function type declaration. And there's a variety of different words that we're going to put in here, and I'm going to talk about the variety of different words that I can use. And so I'm going to pull up another diagram for that, and this one here, and I actually want to get rid of that. Okay. And I'm going to make it a little bigger so you all can see that. All right. All right, so here's a list of the most common function types. There may be two function types that I didn't list, but in general, you probably won't be using those two very often. If you want, you can go research what those are. I'm not going to get into that here. Just to stick to these for right now, and you'll be fine, we're going to look at all the different function types so you can specify starting at the very top here. The first one is public. If we mark a function as being public, that means that anyone in the world can call this function. And when I say anyone, I mean anyone with an account. So anyone with an Ethereum account can access our contract and call any given function. Now, this is not used to implement any kind of security per se. Just putting the public contract in there doesn't mean that we're opening ourselves up to security issues, and putting private, it doesn't make it totally secure. These public-private keywords are no different than Java's access modifiers. Now in Java, you have public, private, protected, and default. But in Solidity, we have public, private, view, constant, pure, and payable. So in the case of private, it's just an access modifier that places a restriction on how far this function can be accessed, if at all, by outside code. In the case of private, for this contract, it can only be accessed by its internal code. Public and private are access modifiers similar to in the Java programming language that are communicating to other engineers on whether these functions should be called at all. So when you create a function and add a private access modifier to it, what you're saying is that this function is not visible outside of the inbox class in this case. So no other parts of the program can access it. No other part that's outside of the contract inbox. In general, we are almost always going to use the public keyword. Now, view and constant keywords really mean the same thing. Constant has been replaced with view, but in some documentation, you might still see constant, and sometimes you might just see view. They mean the same thing, and you can use them interchangeably. Using the view keyword, specifies whether or not that function returns any of the contract's data. So I'll head back to the code editor again so I could show you in my get message function. All right, so here's my get message function. And you'll notice that I'm not attempting to modify the message variable in any way. Here's the message variable. So I'm not attempting to modify this in any way, shape, or form. We're not changing it. We're just simply accessing it. That's why we have the return keyword there. Because I'm only trying to access data in the modifier and not change it whatsoever, I'm making use of the view keyword here and also the return keyword there. This specifies to This specifies to the Solidity compiler, the view keyword, that this does not modify any of my data, and it actually changes the way in which we attempt to call this function. Now let's look at setMessage. The setMessage function, in this case, we accept some argument, the argument of new message, and which is a string, and modify the value of the data within my contract. So we modify the variable of message. So this function would not be appropriate to mark as either view or constant because I am attempting to change the contract. The next access modifier, or let me go back to the table. So, and I'm calling them access modifiers. The next access modifier is pure, and it means that the function will not modify or even access the contract's data. In practice, you'll probably not end up using pure that often, except in some interesting edge cases. In general, you will probably not be using pure at all. The last access modifier that will be used quite a bit is the payable access modifier. And again, I'm calling them access modifiers using the concept of found in the Java programming language, because for me, Solidity is very, very highly resembles the Java programming language. So payable is something that is used when an outside entity attempts to call a function on a contract. Payable means that we might attempt to call it and send money to the contract at the same time. So I'm going to be using payable quite a bit, as a lot of the contracts that I'm going to be writing are going to attempt to accept money from a lot of people. And we're going to expect that people somehow access our contract every time. And every time they do, and we might require them to pay us some money for the privilege of running our code. So you don't have to memorize any of this. I just wanted to show you some keywords you should expect to see often when working with Solidity code. And as time goes on and I write more code, I promise that I am going to continue this pace of breaking down all the code that I'll be using just as I've been doing thus far. Last thing is the return keyword. And I'm just going to go ahead back to the code. This return keyword, this one there. What was I going to say about it? So returns is used to specify a type of return value that we can expect to see back from a function. Return is only used on functions that are marked as view or constant. A function that modifies, like this one here, that modifies the state of a contract will not return any value, so you won't see the return keyword in this kind of function. And to be clear, we can attempt to return a value, but it won't work. And I'll show you why or how later, the whys and the hows later. So I still need to use the remix tool so that I can run, deploy, and test out this contract. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to continue in a subsequent video and get a better sense of how to use this wonderful remix tool. I will see you then.